They say betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, creeping thing, slipping into the cracks of a relationship long before you ever notice. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. I should have realized that the woman I loved was slipping away. But I didn't. I was blind. And by the time I finally opened my eyes, it was already too late. For 11 years, I thought Jane and I had a solid marriage. We weren't perfect, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. We had our routines, our little inside jokes, our quiet moments together that made life feel comfortable. But 2 years ago, everything changed. I had a wake-up call. A doctor's visit that forced me to confront the fact that I was heading down a dangerous road. My blood pressure was high, my cholesterol was out of control, and if I didn't change my lifestyle, I was going to end up with diabetes before I hit 40. That scared the hell out of me. So I did what I had to do. I changed. I started going to the gym, eating better, cutting out all the bad habits I had developed over the years. First, Jane supported me. She even joined me at the gym, saying she wanted to get healthier too. We became one of those couples who meal prepped together, talked about fitness goals, and encouraged each other to push harder. I thought we were growing together, but I was wrong, because somewhere along the way she started pulling away. It started with small things, subtle changes in her behavior that didn't seem like much at first. She started staying later at the gym, saying she wanted to get in extra workouts. She started wearing new workout clothes, tighter, more revealing outfits that she had never cared about before. She started spending more time on her phone, smiling at messages that she would quickly swipe away when I walked into the room. I told myself I was being paranoid. I convinced myself that I was overthinking it, that she was just enjoying her new lifestyle. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then there was Baldy. That's what I called him. The personal trainer at the gym who looked like he spent more time admiring himself in the mirror than actually helping clients. He was the kind of guy who flexed his muscles every chance he got, who made sure every woman in the gym noticed him. And Jane? She noticed him. The first time I saw it, we were on the treadmills, side by side, when Baldy walked past us. Jane's eyes followed him. She bit her lip, her gaze lingering just a second too long. I turned to her and raised an eyebrow. Really? She blinked, confused. What? You were staring at him. She laughed. I wasn't. I was just thinking about something. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But after that, I started paying closer attention. The way she laughed a little too hard at his jokes. The way she leaned in when he talked to her. The way she let him correct her form. His hands lingering on her waist, her arms, her lower back. Every time I mentioned it, she brushed it off. He's just a trainer, she'd say. That's his job. But I knew what I saw. And more than that, I knew my wife. Then came the night I confronted her. She had just finished a workout session with Baldy, and I had watched as he stood behind her, his hands on her hips, guiding her movements like they were in some kind of slow, intimate dance. I clenched my fists and walked over. I got it from here, I said, stepping between them. Baldy smirked, raising his hands in mock surrender. No problem, buddy. Jane rolled her eyes. Oh my God. You're being ridiculous. We fought that night. I told her he was flirting with her, that she was letting it happen. She told me I was insecure, that I was imagining things. She told me I needed to get over my jealousy. And somehow I ended up apologizing. That was my mistake, because that was the night she realized she could lie to me, that she could make me doubt myself, that she could get away with it. And so she did. They say that when something feels off in a relationship, it usually is. You can't always explain it, but there's a shift, a feeling, an unspoken tension that lingers in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. After that night at the gym, after Jane brushed off my concerns and made me feel like I was the crazy one, something inside me changed. I stopped bringing it up, but I never stopped watching. For a few weeks, things seemed to go back to normal. Jane still went to the gym, but she made an effort to reassure me. She texted me while she was there, sent me pictures of her workouts, even invited me to join her a few times. I wanted to believe that I had overreacted. I wanted to believe that Baldy was just a trainer and nothing more. And for a while, I convinced myself that things were fine. But deep down, I knew. The real cracks started to show when my work schedule changed. My job had always been predictable, regular shifts, the same hours every week. But then I was offered a promotion. It came with better pay, but it also meant working late afternoons and evenings. Jane encouraged me to take it, saying it was a great opportunity. And I agreed. But looking back, I wonder if she was relieved, because it meant that we could no longer go to the gym together. I started working late, and Jane started going to the gym in the evenings, alone. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then she started coming home later. At first, it was 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour. She always had a reason. She ran into a friend, she stayed to stretch, she had to take a long shower. And I wanted to believe her, so I did. But the distance between us kept growing. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped asking about my day, stopped touching me the way she used to. Our conversations became surface level, small talk, logistics, nothing deeper than that. It was like she was there, but her mind was somewhere else. And I started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. One night, I tried to reconnect with her. I made dinner, set the table, poured her a glass of wine. When she walked in, sweaty from the gym, she barely looked at me. "Hey," I said, smiling. "I made your favorite." She hesitated. "Oh, thanks." I pulled out her chair, motioning for her to sit. "Thought we could have a nice night together. Just us." She sighed, rubbing her neck. "I'm really tired, David. Can we just eat?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Yeah, sure." We ate in silence. She scrolled through her phone, barely touching her food. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask what was wrong, why she was pulling away. But I didn't, because I was afraid of the answer. That was the moment I knew that whatever was happening, whatever was pulling her away from me, was already too big to ignore. But I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. They say when you love someone, you ignore the signs you don't want to see. You tell yourself stories, make excuses, try to believe that things are normal even when they're falling apart right in front of you. That's exactly what I did. Even when Jane was coming home late from the gym, even when she was distant, even when I felt the shift in my gut, I still told myself I was imagining it. But then she stopped touching me. That was the moment I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just emotional distance now. She stopped holding my hand, stopped resting her head on my shoulder when we watched TV, stopped kissing me before bed. At first, I convinced myself that she was just tired, stressed, not in the mood. But weeks passed, then months, and the gap between us turned into a canyon. One night, I finally brought it up. We were lying in bed, backs to each other, the space between us feeling like a wall. I took a deep breath and turned toward her. "Jane," I said softly. She didn't respond right away. Then, after a moment, she sighed. "What?" I hesitated. "What's going on with us?" She stiffened. "What do you mean? You don't touch me anymore. You barely talk to me. You're always on your phone, always at the gym. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." She let out a tired breath. "David, I don't know. I feel off lately. Maybe I'm going through something." I searched her face for the truth, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Are you unhappy?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. I just feel different." I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. That was the moment I knew. She was already gone. She just hadn't told me yet. The man who knew too much. The final piece of the puzzle didn't come from me. It came from our building's security guard, Mr. P. One evening, after another late night at work, I ran into him in the lobby. We made small talk, weather, sports, nothing serious. But then, out of nowhere, he chuckled. "By the way," he said, rubbing his shoulder, "you should tell your wife to get her next massage at a spa instead of here." I blinked. "What?" He laughed. "You know, the guy that came over the other night. Looked like a personal trainer. He must be good at his job. She let him in 3 times this month." I felt my stomach drop. My vision blurred for a second, and I forced myself to breathe. "Wait," I said carefully. "Who?" Mr. P frowned. "Oh, I figured you knew. He came during the day. Bald guy, muscular. Looked like one of those fitness types. Baldy. It was Baldy." I forced a smile, pretending like I wasn't about to be sick, right? Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah, man, Mr. P continued, shaking his head. Some of us joked about how dedicated he must be to his clients, making house calls like that. But hey, whatever works, right? I nodded, every muscle in my body tight. Then I went upstairs and checked the security footage. And there he was, walking into my home, while I was at work. The trap. I didn't confront Jane that night. I needed proof. I needed to catch her in the act. So I planned. I called in sick the next day, telling Jane that I had an important meeting and wouldn't be home until late. She barely looked up from her phone when I told her. Just nodded and said, "Okay, have a good day." I left for work like usual, but instead of going to the office, I parked down the street and waited. Hours passed. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My heart pounded in my ears. Then, right on schedule, Baldy showed up. I watched from my car as he entered the building. Watched as he walked into my home. I waited 15 minutes. Then I went inside. My hands were steady as I turned the key in the lock. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was ready. I opened the bedroom door. And there they were, Jane and Baldy, in our bed. The moment I walked through that door, everything slowed down. The world around me blurred. My vision tunneled. And all I could see was the scene in front of me. My wife in my bed with him. The sheets were tangled around them, her bare back exposed, his arms still wrapped around her waist. For a split second, none of them moved. It was as if they hadn't fully processed what was happening. And then, like a switch had flipped, the panic set in. Jane's face twisted in horror as she yanked the blanket over herself, scrambling away from him. Baldy, that smug, arrogant bastard, froze for a second before rolling off the bed and reaching for his clothes. My hands curled into fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. "David," Jane started, her voice shaky, her eyes wide with shock and something else. Fear? Guilt? Regret? It didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I turned my gaze to Baldy, who was now frantically pulling on his pants. "Don't even think about running," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You stay right where you are." He swallowed hard but didn't move. He must have sensed that if he tried to bolt, I wouldn't hesitate to break his nose. Good. He should be scared. Jane clutched the blanket to her chest, her breathing uneven. "David, please, just let me explain." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Explain? You want to explain this?" I gestured toward the bed, my voice rising. "Go ahead, Jane. Tell me how this isn't what it looks like. Tell me how you accidentally ended up naked in bed with him." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." I shook my head. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything." Baldy finally found his voice. "Look, man, I turned to him so fast he flinched. Shut. The F asterisk asterisk asterisk. Up." He held up his hands, stepping back. "You've been coming to my house for months?" I continued, my voice cold. "Sneaking around behind my back. Lying to me. And what? You thought I'd never find out." Jane let out a sob.
David, I'm sorry.
I ignored her. My eyes were locked on Baldy, on the pathetic excuse of a man standing half-dressed in my bedroom. "Get out," I said, my voice sharp as a blade. "Before I do something you'll regret." He hesitated for only a second before grabbing his shoes and bolting out the door, half naked, right past my neighbors who had undoubtedly heard the commotion. I turned back to Jane, my chest heaving. She was crying now, her face buried in her hands, her body trembling, but I felt nothing.
No pity, no sadness.
Just a cold, hollow emptiness where my love for her used to be. "You need to leave," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She lifted her head, her expression desperate. "David, please, we can talk about this."
No, Jane.
"We don't exist anymore. Pack your things. Get out of my house." She let out a choked sob but didn't argue. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Maybe she finally understood that she had lost me forever. As I walked out of the room, leaving her to gather the remnants of the life she had destroyed, I realized something. I wasn't the broken one in this situation. She was, and I had no intention of picking up the pieces for her. The silence after the storm was almost worse than the confrontation itself. The moment I walked out of that bedroom, leaving Jane to sit in the wreckage of our marriage, everything hit me at once. My hands were shaking, my pulse was pounding, but there was nothing left to do. I had seen what I needed to see. There was no going back. I walked straight into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, and poured myself a drink with unsteady hands. I barely took a sip before setting it down, staring at the countertop. My mind replayed everything in a loop, the way she looked at me, the way Baldy scrambled to get out, the sheer audacity of them thinking they could get away with this. From the bedroom, I heard Jane moving around, opening drawers, shuffling through her things. She was packing. Good. I wasn't going to give her the chance to stay. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I barely noticed. Eventually, I heard her footsteps behind me, hesitant and soft. "David," she said quietly. I didn't turn around. "Are you done?" My voice was flat, emotionless. She sniffled. I need to say something before I go." I exhaled slowly and turned to face her. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair a mess, her hands gripping the strap of her duffel bag so tightly her knuckles were white. "I never meant for it to happen like this," she whispered. I stared at her, waiting for something that would make any of this make sense. Some kind of admission, some kind of regret that didn't feel so damn empty. But nothing she could say would change the truth. "You had months to stop," I said, my voice sharp. "You had months to come clean. Instead, you let me believe I was the problem. You lied to me, every single day." She swallowed hard. "I know. Then why?" I demanded, my voice finally cracking. "Why would you do this? Was I not good enough? Were you bored?" Her lower lip trembled. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like." I shot back. "Tell me what part of sneaking around with another man in my own home wasn't like betrayal." She opened her mouth, then closed it.
No excuses. No justification.
Because there wasn't one. Finally, she whispered, "I think I was scared." I let out a bitter laugh. "Scared of what?" She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Of losing you." I stared at her in stunned disbelief. "So your solution to that was to cheat on me?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I saw you changing, getting stronger, more confident. I felt like you didn't need me anymore." I shook my head, disgusted. "You don't destroy a marriage because you're afraid of losing it. You fight for it. But instead of fighting, you threw it away." She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. "It's too late, Jane," I said quietly. "Whatever we had is gone." She nodded slowly, as if she had finally accepted the truth. She wiped at her tears and hoisted her bag over her shoulder. "Where will you go?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I even cared. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know." For a second, just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered what I had walked in on, how she had packed my suitcase for me when she thought she was getting rid of me. And just like that, whatever sympathy I had left was gone. I walked to the door and opened it. "Goodbye, Jane." She hesitated, then nodded. Without another word, she stepped past me, into the hallway, out of my life. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I felt the weight of everything settle onto my chest. I had spent 11 years building a life with her, and now it was over. Just like that. And the worst part? She was the one who burned it all down. The night Jane left, I sat in the living room, staring at the walls of an empty house. It didn't feel real. One moment, we were a married couple with a life together. The next, she was gone, and all that remained was silence. I should have felt relief, but all I could feel was a strange emptiness, a numbness that settled deep in my chest. I knew she wasn't coming back. I didn't want her to, but that didn't change the fact that I was alone. At some point, I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages. Texts she had sent me months ago, back when I still believed we were happy. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you. Love you. I clenched my jaw and threw the phone onto the couch. Those words meant nothing now. They were just reminders of a lie I had been living in for far too long. By morning, the numbness had faded, replaced by something sharper. Anger, not just at Jane but at myself. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I let her manipulate me into thinking I was the problem? I had spent months doubting myself, going to therapy, trying to be a better husband, while she was sleeping with another man behind my back. The betrayal cut deep, but the fact that she had let me believe I was crazy, that was the part that made my blood boil. I couldn't stay in that house. Not yet. Everything reminded me of her. The scent of her perfume still lingering in the bedroom, the empty side of the closet where her clothes had been, the coffee mug she always used still sitting in the sink. I grabbed my keys and left, driving with no real destination in mind, just needing to get away. I ended up at my brother's house. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Jane?" he asked, his voice cautious. I just nodded. He didn't ask for details, didn't push me to talk before I was ready. He just grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and sat down next to me. "She cheated, didn't she?" I exhaled sharply. "Yeah." He let out a long breath, shaking his head. F******.
I am sorry, Mom.
I stared at the beer in my hands. I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to believe it. He took a sip of his drink. "You loved her. It's not your fault." I scoffed. "Isn't it, though?" I let her gaslight me. She made me think I was paranoid, that I was insecure. I went to therapy thinking I was the one with issues. My brother frowned. "That's what cheaters do. They make you feel like the crazy one while they're the ones lying." I took a long drink, letting his words sink in. He was right. This wasn't my fault. Jane had made a choice, a selfish, cruel choice, and I was done blaming myself for it. That night, I slept at my brother's house. It was the first time in months I didn't dream about Jane. The fallout. When I finally returned home, I braced myself for the emptiness. But instead of feeling like a man who had lost something, I felt like a man who had been given a second chance. This wasn't our house anymore. It was mine, and I was going to make damn sure it felt that way. The first thing I did was gather every single thing that reminded me of her. Photos, clothes she had left behind, little gifts she had given me over the years. I stuffed it all into a box and dumped it in the garage. I wasn't ready to throw it away just yet, but I sure as hell wasn't going to keep it in my house. Then I started making changes. I rearranged the furniture, bought new sheets, new pillows, new decorations. Anything to make the space feel different. Anything to erase the version of my life that had included her. And then, I did the thing I had been dreading most. I called a lawyer. The divorce process was smoother than I expected, mostly because Jane had no leverage. I had the video, the messages, the evidence. She didn't even try to fight it. Maybe she thought if she played nice, I would change my mind. Maybe she thought I'd still give her something in the settlement. But she was wrong. She walked away with nothing. No house, no money.
No sympathy.
I heard through mutual friends that she tried reaching out to Baldy after everything fell apart. But it didn't take long for him to lose interest. He wasn't looking for a relationship. He was just looking for a thrill. And once the excitement of sneaking around was gone, so was he. She had thrown away her marriage for nothing. I wish I could say that realization made me feel better. But the truth is, it didn't. Because no matter how much she suffered, it wouldn't undo what she did to me. Starting over. Took time, but eventually, the weight of betrayal started to fade. I focused on myself, my health, my career, my friends. I spent more time at the gym, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because it was the one place where I felt in control. Women started noticing me more. First, I ignored it. The idea of dating again felt impossible. I didn't trust myself to open up, didn't trust women to be honest with me. But slowly, that changed. One night, I was at a bar with some friends when a woman caught my eye. She was beautiful, confident, but what struck me most was her laugh. Genuine, warm. Nothing like the forced, hollow smile Jane used to give me near the end. She saw me looking and smiled. "You going to come say hi?" Or are you just going to stare? I chuckled, shaking my head. I guess that depends. Are you married? Her smile faded into something more serious.
No.
And I don't cheat, if that's what you're asking. Something in her voice told me she had her own story, her own scars. Maybe that's why I took the chance. Maybe that's why I finally let myself move forward. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. The further I moved away from Jane, the more I realized how much of myself I had lost in that marriage. Every day, I felt lighter, freer, like a man who had escaped from a prison he didn't even know he was in. The house no longer smelled like her perfume. The bed no longer felt empty. The guilt, the shame, the self-doubt she had planted in my head, it was all starting to fade. But just when I thought I was finally in the clear, just when I was beginning to believe that Jane was nothing but a ghost in my past, she came back. Started with a phone call. I was at work, in the middle of a meeting, when my phone buzzed. Jane. I stared at the screen for a long time, my pulse quickening. She hadn't tried to contact me since the divorce was finalized. Not once. So why now? I let the call go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another call. Then a text. David, please. I need to talk to you. I should have ignored it. I should have blocked her number and gone about my day. But something about the message unsettled me. She didn't sound manipulative. She didn't sound like she was trying to weasel her way back into my life. She sounded desperate. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the voicemail. Her voice was shaky, like she had been crying. David, I know I don't deserve to ask for anything from you, but I really need to talk. It's important. Please, just give me 5 minutes. I clenched my jaw, debating whether I should respond. After everything she had done, after all the pain she had put me through, what could possibly be so important? I didn't want to care, but a small, nagging voice in my head told me to find out. So I did. The meeting. The next evening, I met Jane at a small cafe downtown. She looked different. Tired, pale, her eyes hollowed out like she hadn't been sleeping. She was fidgeting with her hands when I walked in, her knee bouncing under the table. When she saw me, she let out a breath of relief. David, she whispered. I sat down across from her, arms crossed. You have 5 minutes. Talk. She swallowed hard. I messed up. I let out a short laugh.
Yeah, no kidding.
Her eyes filled with tears. No, I mean worse than you think. I didn't just lose you. I lost everything. And now I think someone is following me. That caught me off guard. What? She looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to be listening. After we divorced, things went downhill fast. Baldy, he disappeared. He never really cared about me. I had to move in with a friend because I had nowhere else to go. I tried getting back on my feet, but it's like everything I touch falls apart. I said nothing. This wasn't my problem. She wiped her eyes. But then weird things started happening. I would leave work and feel like someone was watching me. My apartment got broken into, but nothing was stolen. Just things moved around, like someone wanted me to know they had been there. A cold sensation ran down my spine. Jane, what are you saying? She hesitated, then whispered, I think it's him. My breath caught. Baldy. She nodded quickly. After I left you for him, he got possessive, controlling. And when I told him it was over, he didn't take it well. I clenched my jaw, my muscles tensing. And now you think he's stalking you? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't think I know. He sent me messages. Stuff that only someone watching me would know. I exhaled slowly, trying to process what she was saying. Part of me wanted to walk away, tell her this wasn't my problem, that she had made her bed and now she had to lie in it. But another part of me, a part one hated, still felt a sliver of concern. Not because I still loved her. That was long gone. But because no matter how much I despised her, I didn't want to see her hurt. Still, I had to ask, why are you telling me this? Why not go to the police? She let out a bitter laugh. I did. They told me they couldn't do anything unless he actually did something. I rubbed my temples. And what do you expect me to do? She swallowed hard. I don't know. I don't have anyone else to turn to. I looked at her for a long moment, debating my next move. Was she manipulating me? Was this just another attempt to drag me back into her life? Or was she genuinely scared? I didn't have an answer, but what I did know was that if Baldy was stalking her, then he was dangerous. And if he was dangerous to her, he might be dangerous to me, too. The investigation. That night, after leaving Jane at the cafe, I did something I hadn't done in months. I dug into Baldy's past. A few phone calls and some online research later, I found exactly what I was looking for. His real name wasn't even what he told people. He had a history, restraining orders from other women, accusations of harassment, even a few assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared. He was a predator. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Jane might have betrayed me, but she wasn't lying about this. Baldy wasn't just some sleazy trainer who slept with married women. He was something worse. And if Jane was right, if he was watching her, then this wasn't over. Not for her. Not for me. The trap. I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to let Baldy get away with this. I texted Jane. If he's really following you, we're going to prove it. Meet me tomorrow. She responded almost instantly. You believe me? I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. I believe that you're in danger, and I'm not letting him ruin my life any more than he already has. I had already lost my marriage to this bastard. I wasn't going to lose my peace of mind, too. Whatever he was planning, whatever game he thought he was playing, it ended now. When I agreed to meet Jane again the next day, I didn't do it because I cared about her. That part of me had died the moment I caught her in my bed with Baldy. But if there was one thing I hated more than my ex-wife, it was the idea of that smug bastard getting away with everything. My marriage, my dignity, and now, apparently, Jane's safety. I wasn't a fool. I knew Jane had used me before. I knew she was a liar, but I also knew fear when I saw it. And yesterday, when she sat across from me in that cafe, she had been terrified. Whether she deserved my help or not, one thing was clear: Baldy wasn't done playing games. And I wasn't about to let him win. Setting the bait. The plan was simple. We would go about Jane's routine as if nothing had changed, while I stayed close enough to watch. If Baldy was following her, I would catch him. And once I had proof, I would handle it. Jane met me in a parking lot early that evening, bundled in a jacket, looking around nervously. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. You go home, do your normal routine. If he shows up, I'll be watching. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe, or regret. It didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing this because I refused to let Baldy think he could control my life any more than he already had. Jane left, and I followed at a distance, my car parked a few blocks away from her apartment. I had a clear view of the entrance, my eyes trained on every movement. The first hour was uneventful. Jane went inside. Lights turned on. Normal. Quiet. Too quiet. Then, just after midnight, a dark figure appeared at the far end of the street. I sat up straighter. He moved cautiously, staying close to the shadows, pausing near Jane's building as if he were debating something. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. It was him, Baldy. Confrontation in the dark. I stepped out of my car, heart pounding but steady. I wasn't scared, I was angry. This was the man who had wrecked my marriage, humiliated me, taken everything I had built and turned it into a joke. And now, after all that, he thought he could stalk my ex-wife? No, not on my watch. He was halfway to Jane's door when I spoke. Going somewhere? He froze. Slowly, he turned to face me. Even in the dim light, I saw the flicker of surprise on his face. He hadn't expected me. David, he said, smirking. Didn't know you were still keeping tabs on your ex. I clenched my fists. I could say the same about you. He chuckled, shaking his head. Look, man, whatever Jane told you, she's lying. You know how she is. I took a step closer. I don't need her to tell me anything. I saw you. I know you've been following her. And I know about the other women, too. That wiped the smirk off his face. The hell are you talking about? I pulled out my phone. Restraining orders. Assault charges. Women you've scared before. You really thought you were untouchable. For the first time, he looked nervous. Good. You don't have proof, he muttered. I smirked. Not yet, but I will. He lunged. I was ready. The fight. The moment he moved, I ducked, anticipating the swing. He was fast, but I had been training, lifting, waiting for this moment. His punch barely grazed my jaw before I drove my fist into his ribs, knocking the wind out of him. He staggered, but I didn't let him recover. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the nearest wall. You've already taken enough from me, I hissed. But I'm not the same man you screwed over last year. You come near her again, near me again, and I swear. The sound of police sirens cut through the air. Baldy's eyes widened. I let him go just as 2 patrol cars pulled up, flashing red and blue against the darkened street. Jane stood at her apartment door, her phone in her shaking hands. She had called them. For once, she had done something right. The officers stepped out, immediately moving to separate us. What's going on here? One of them demanded. I raised my hands. I was defending myself. He attacked first. Baldy, still winded, scowled. Bullsh asterisk T. One of the cops turned to Jane. Ma'am, do you know either of these men? She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. He's been stalking me, she said, pointing at Baldy. He broke into my apartment last week. That was all they needed. The next few minutes were a blur. Baldy cursing, struggling, being shoved into the back of a police car. One of the officers asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The end of a nightmare. By the time the street was quiet again, Jane and I stood there in silence. She looked at me, her face unreadable. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded. Don't thank me. Just don't let this happen again. She let out a shaky laugh. You were always the strong one. I just didn't see it until it was too late. I met her gaze. Yeah, you didn't. There was nothing left to say. No forgiveness, no second chances. Just 2 people standing in the aftermath of a life they had once shared, now strangers. I turned and walked away, and this time I didn't look back. A new beginning. Months passed. Life moved on. I moved on. The house that once felt empty now felt like mine. I surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never be enough. I stopped looking for closure because I had already found it. One night, at a bar with some friends, a woman caught my eye. She wasn't flashy, wasn't trying too hard. She was just real. She smiled at me, tilting her head. You look like you've been through some sh*T. I chuckled, taking a sip of my drink. You have no idea. She extended her hand. Tell me about it. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to, because my past no longer controlled me. I had finally won. The end.